All right, here we go. Chapter 21. Let's read through this. So there was before I start with this, I have to let you know the interesting thing between chapter 21 and chapter 24, all of those in there, is that these are not in chronological order. This event here did not happen after the event that we just discussed with Sheba, the head over, all of that. These 21 through 24 is like an epilogue. It's like a PS at the end of the chapter. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you about this. So these are not in chronological order. Even 21 through 24 is not chronological. In other words, 21 didn't happen first, and then 22nd and 23rd. It's just random events that they're putting at the end of Samuel to sort of tie it all together. So they're not necessarily in chronological order. Well, they're not. They're so definitely not. Huh?
Maybe in order of gore.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, go ahead.
120 included in that?
No,
order?
21, 22, 23,
Okay.
and 24.
20
20 is in chronological order. So don't think that this happened after we just had that event. So there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered and said, "It is because of Saul and his bloodthirsty house, because he killed the Gibeonites." So let's set that, let's try and get a better understanding of that. We don't know exactly when this famine took place, this 3-year famine. We know that it was after Mephibosheth, because Mephibosheth is mentioned in this chapter, and David is protecting him. Well, remember that David didn't know about Mephibosheth till after he became the king, and then he was one day looking out and saying, "I'd like to do something good for Jonathan's family," and then he found out that Mephibosheth was still alive and stuff. So it was after that time period, but not all the way at the end of his reign or after the events that we've just studied. So we're not exactly sure when it happened, but there was a famine. And so the first year, David thinks, doesn't think much about it. The second year, evidently not either. And then the third year, he goes to inquire of the Lord. We know what that means. What does it mean? He goes to the priest. That's right, the Urim and the Thummim, all of that. The priest then hears from the Lord and gives the information to David after he inquires of it. What would have happened if David would have gone after the first year and inquired of the Lord? Well, they wouldn't have only had 1 year of famine. But David waits until the third year to do that. And so the Lord is very clear. He says it's because of Saul, and it's because of Saul's bloodthirsty house. That's going to be important. So remember that, because of his bloodthirsty house, because he kills the Gibeonites. We are not given any information in any of the books of the Bible about this event of the Gibeonites. We don't know exactly what Saul did. We do know from what the Gibeonites tell David in this chapter that he tried to wipe them out and that he tried to totally expunge them from the land of Israel. So whatever it is that Saul did, it was all encompassing. And he tried to completely annihilate the people from the land. So it was very severe. We just simply don't have any information on what it is that he did. The other thing is it talks about his bloodthirsty house, which means Saul didn't just do this on his own. He did it with the affirmation and the agreement and the support of those people that were in his house. His sons, his grandsons, his nephews, all the people that were involved with Saul also were supportive of this cleansing of the Gibeonites. That's important for us because we need to know why people are Saul's no longer there, he's dead, but why are other people being killed? Well, what we don't know are who are the people, these people that are being selected, where did they fit in with that? We don't have all of that information.
Weren't they Amorites, and weren't they supposed to clean off the land when they moved in?
Okay. Yep. But let me take it in order. So we don't know who these people literally were, but we can suppose that there is some guilt in the family line of these people, part of that bloodthirsty house that did it. Now, Jane is talking about the Amorites and the cleansing of the land when Joshua went in was given the commandment to clear the land off, which he didn't do, but he was supposed to. However, if you go to Joshua chapter 9, which is part of your packet, and you will have the ability to do that this week, I've included it in here. It's called the Gibeonite Deception. So read that this week in its totality, but I'm just going to give you the cliff notes. The cliff notes to that is that Joshua comes in and he's going to clear the land, but the Gibeonites come up to him and they provide him with some assistance, and they say, hey, make a covenant with us. And Joshua says, well, you live next to us and we're supposed to be clearing the land. I don't know. There's a little bit of deception that goes on. And Joshua ends up making a covenant with the Gibeonites that they will not harm them or go against them. Now, it's made under false pretenses, and it goes against God's commandment to Joshua to clear the land. However, because he makes a covenant with these people, God demands that it be kept. Even under those extenuating circumstances, God's people gave their word. It reflects on their God when they keep it. It also reflects on their God when they break it. So the Gibeonites were to be exempt from the attacks of Joshua as he was clearing out the land. So they continue to stay in the land, and it isn't until Saul comes along. Timeline, we're talking about 400 years has passed between Joshua and this time frame. So the people know that the Gibeonites are exempt from this. Everyone knows. It's part of their culture. It's part of their history. It's part of their teaching. But Saul decides for whatever reason that they need to go. Again, we're not given details, so I can't tell you why he decides they need to be pushed out of the land, but they do it. Had they not made this covenant, it would have been okay because they were told to cleanse the land for the people anyway. But the covenant is important. When I was studying this, one of the things that I was thinking about was we really don't have any idea the importance of a covenant, and I've touched on that with you. We've done some study on it. We talked a little bit about it with David and Jonathan and all of that, and so we've got some ideas. I mean, as a whole, most people are really not familiar with the strength of a covenant of marriage, a covenant of whatever the covenant that is made. God is quite serious about it. A covenant is something that cannot be broken, and that is critically important to us because God's promises to us are a covenant. His promise to Noah was that the world would never be completely destroyed by a flood again. The rainbow was the sign of that. Interestingly, just a little side note, in Revelation 4, there's another emerald rainbow around the throne of God, a sign of a covenant also that God has made to the people that they will one day live and dwell with him through the promise of the Messiah, that there is going to be another time. The covenants of God are irrevocable, and it's because of that I've so strongly tried to teach you guys about the fact that God's covenants to the Jewish people. Why is that so important? Not because they're so amazingly wonderful, but because God's word is unbreakable. And because of that, the promises that he gave to them must be fulfilled, or he's not the God that we know that he is. This is an example of that, where we show that a covenant that is made by the name of the Lord God to a people will not be broken, and Saul broke it. Why 400 years? Why did this go on for 400 years? And why did God not take care of it right when Saul did it? Right when he got rid of the Gibeonites? Why is this now a period of years later? We don't know exactly because it's not chronological in its timing. But why not Saul? Why David? We don't know, do we? We do know that God knew that Saul was going to be leaving anyway, and that perhaps this was something that needed to be imparted. In my thinking, I was thinking maybe there was someone whether it was David or someone else that needed to be reminded of the importance of a covenant. I don't know. That's just me. And I'm thinking maybe there's someone out there that needed this lesson all these years later, and so it wasn't Saul, but it was someone else. But for whatever reason, yes.
But there could have been people that were involved in that still living, right?
They would have been older people, right? That could have been involved in knowing about that. Definitely the descendants of Saul, because it talks about his bloodthirsty house. Now, one of the things that I did not put in your packet, but you're going to want to do a little reading on, so write this down this week when you're doing your study. It's in Numbers chapter 35. Numbers chapter 35, starting at verse 29 and going to 34. All right, and do a little study on that, because what it's talking about is it says, well, let me just read it to you. It's easier than paraphrasing. It says, "These things shall be a statute of judgment to you throughout your generations in all of your dwellings. Whoever kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses, but one witness is not sufficient testimony against a person for the death penalty. Moreover, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall surely be put to death." Right? So there, he's talking about the death penalty, and that murder is definitely a death penalty charge. And it says here, "You shall take no ransom for him who has fled to a city of refuge, that he may return to dwell in the land before the death of the priest." So it's talking about if they go to a city of refuge. But here's our point, 33. "So you shall not pollute the land where you are, for blood defiles the land." A murder, killing, defiles the land, and no atonement can be made for the land. "For the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it."
And that was in Numbers.
Numbers chapter 35, verses 29 through 34, but specifically 33. I gave you the entirety of it because I wanted you to see it in context. I hate to pull something out and see that. But it's very clear. "You shall not pollute the land where you are. Blood defiles the land. No atonement can be made for the land except for the blood of the one who shed it." So God is going back and pulling out the law and regulation that he gave the people, that they knew, that they were taught, that their leaders knew, and he's enforcing it in this particular case.
The Gibeonites were the ones lived close, deceived
Yes.
Joshua
Yes.
by looking like they had traveled a long way.
Yes, absolutely.
So this covenant was built on a deception.
Exactly. And I mentioned that when I was giving you the cliff notes to chapter 9, but it doesn't matter, because God still considers it to be a covenant promise. You can go back and look at Jacob when Leah is given to him. And that's a deceit. But there was a covenant promise made in a marriage vow.
There was also, tying this back to the last story, if a woman was raped, the guy had to marry her.
Right.
He couldn't divorce her.
Right.
So with the marriage covenant was based on some evil too,
But the covenant is a covenant, and it needs to be fulfilled. And so this Gibeonite covenant was set in stone, and Saul had defiled that through his actions. So all of that is important because the events of this story are just so radical that we need to understand where it comes from. So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them, and then there's a little parenthesis here. Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but the remnant of the Amorites. The children of Israel had sworn protection to them, but Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. So that's just a little parenthesis. We know that they're not Jews. They were part of the Amorites. But Saul, I'm reading verse number 2 of our chapter.
Oh, okay.
All right. So David gets this information from the Lord, and he goes to the Gibeonites in verse 3, and it says, "What shall I do for you? What shall I, and with what shall I make an atonement that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord? Once again, that term, inheritance of the Lord, is talking about Israel. And so he's saying, how do I make this right with you? And the Gibeonites said to him, we don't want any silver or gold from Saul or from his household, or that you should kill any man in Israel for us. So in other words, we don't want to go in and slaughter Israel. We don't want money, ransom. We don't want anything. But what we do want is, and he said, so David says, okay, well then whatever you say, I will do for you. And they answered the king in verse 5 and said, as for the man who consumed us and plotted against us, who is that? Saul, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the territories of Israel. So that tells you how extensive Saul's actions were towards them. Now, verse 6, let 7 men of his descendants be delivered to us, and we will hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord chose. And the king said, I will give them. All right. So they're asking for the blood of the 7 descendants to atone for the murder in their land. They want it in Gibeah, which is where Saul was anointed, and they know it had a special meaning to Saul. They know that the Lord chose him there. And so they will hang them. Now, there's some disagreement. It doesn't really matter, just a point of interest. There's a disagreement between scholars as to whether or not that's hanging this way or whether it's actually an impaling upon a stake, you know, like almost a crucifixion type of thing where they would be placed up on a stake. Crucifixion was not yet in place, but I'm saying that type of thing. It doesn't matter. Whatever it was horrible. And they were to be placed, all 7 of them, and that was going to atone for what it is that Saul had done. And David agrees to it. Now,
Without knowing even what it was going to be, it sounds like.
He agrees to it early. He says, "What I'll do,
Right,
what you
David.
say." Yeah. So now the king spares Mephibosheth in verse 7, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath that was between them. So our little crippled Mephibosheth, he's going to spare him, and he's not going to be given over, even though he would have been like one of the prime descendants of Saul. David takes him off of the bartering table. And it's confusing because in 8 it says, so the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth. And it's a little bit confusing, but this is another Mephibosheth. This is not our Mephibosheth that we know. This is not the lame Mephibosheth. Just like George is a name that many people have, or Steve or Dave, that Mephibosheth evidently was a name that was, there was 2 of them even in Saul's family.
The fact that he was lame, though, would that...
No, it was the oath. It was the oath, the covenant made to Jonathan. So these 2 were the sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, I don't know if I'm saying that, whom she bore to Saul. So this is Saul's concubine. And she has these 2 sons that are Saul's, and he takes those 2. And the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Barzillai, the Maholathite. So let's make sure we get these people right. Remember
Michael, I thought that she didn't have children.
Okay,
Right.
so you guys are so quick. I can't get the answers out before. And so he, remember, Michal is his first wife. Saul takes her away, gives her to another man. David requires her. She goes back with her husband, weeping behind her. Then she laughs at David because he dances when the Ark of the Covenant is brought in, and he has nothing else to do with her. And we're given that verse that says, and she doesn't have any children at all. And so there is a little bit of an issue with how would she have these 5 sons. All of our earliest transcripts have the name Merab in here, not Michal. Merab was Michal's sister. Okay, so Merab, we learned that earlier on in Samuel. Merab and Michal were sisters. Merab was married to this man that's mentioned here, the Adriel. That's Merab's husband. And all of the earliest transcripts have that. However, the Septuagint has Michael in here, very likely in error, because these are Mirab's children with Adriel that Michael has probably raised.
But that makes sense because it says whom she brought up for Adriel.
That's right. And so she's now that would mean that Mirab is out of the picture, likely died. And so Michael raises these 5 children of her sisters. And David takes those 5. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the hill before the Lord. And they all fell, all 7 together. They were put to death in the days of the harvest, in the first days in the beginning of the barley harvest. Perhaps that's in there to give us an idea of how long Rizpah is going to stand out here, because that's going to be in the end time of April. That time frame of the end of the barley, at the early days at the beginning of the harvest. That's going to be in April. And it says, now Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock. So she makes a tent out of the sackcloth. We know sackcloth was often used for mourning. People would put it on. And she makes herself some sort of a little tent out of that. And from the beginning of the harvest, or when this happened in April, the end of April, until the late rains poured on them from heaven. So we're talking about the fall, October-ish, very likely, when the latter rains are going to come. So from April till October, Rizpah stands out and protects the bodies of her 2 sons that are on there. It's a long time for her to be out there.
And danger. If they're beasts of the field.
Yeah.
Beasts of the field.
Animals.
Not to
Oh,
mention
scary.
what a horrible thing to have to sit and witness every day, and to
Yes.
see what happens. These people are out in the blazing sun, and what happens. And she did not allow the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. So she kept them protected, their bodies protected.
That would have been a hard job.
Yep, it would have been.
David couldn't release the bodies, was that?
Well, you know, it was considered a horrible thing to have a body exposed like that. So because this was a judgment, I think it was an emphasis. It was like a exclamation point of we're not going to bury them. We're not going to give them the honor that comes from burial. They're just going to hang out there, and we're going to know you should never break an oath of the covenant. And that's just the way that they ended up doing it with these people. Now in verse 11, David was told what Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. So it's a very loving thing. And evidently he was moved. Because it says, then David went and he took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the streets of Bethshan when the Philistines had hung them up, after the Philistines had struck down Saul in Gilboa. So that's one of our old stories. They die in battle. They hang them up on the wall, Saul and Jonathan. The men of Jabesh Gilead go in and they steal the bodies back because Saul had at one time protected them against enemies. And they steal the bodies back. Evidently the body of Saul and Jonathan had remained in Jabesh Gilead, the men of Jabesh Gilead in that area. The bodies had remained there. And so he brought up the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from there, and they gathered the bones of those who had been hanged. Now, when you think about bringing up the bones, the most typical way that was done is the ossuaries, where they would have them, they gather them up. An ossuary is a box where bones are gathered after the flesh all falls off. The size of an ossuary depends on the size of a person. And so it's your largest bone, length and width. And so men's ossuary boxes are bigger than children's ossuary boxes. And so ossuaries were used so that when the body decomposed, you could gather the bones and you could have an entire group of people buried in one tomb because they have individual ossuary boxes. So only one body is decomposing at a time. Once that body decomposes, you gather the bones together and you put them in the ossuary boxes. There are thousands of them that have been discovered in very recent times, and throughout archaeology, there's thousands and thousands of ossuary boxes. It's a very common thing to have had. So that's likely what they might have done there was to gather the bones, however they gather them together, and they gather the bones off of the 7 who are hanging up. So here is a point where David is going to give them some honor in burying their bodies. But why does he do that?
Why does he do it to Saul, who caused all the problems?
Because Saul was God's anointed, and he always respected that. But why does he do it? Because of Rizpah, right? And so he's moved by the devotion that Rizpah shows towards the bodies. She has no power to do anything other than keep the birds away from them and the beasts away from them. But he's moved by that. So he gathers the bones. It seems to me like it's about time that he does this. And so for that purpose, he gathers them all together, and they are buried in one tomb. And then it says after that, they performed all that the king commanded when they bury the bones. And then after that, God heeded the prayer for the land. And so it was that very action that had caused the famine. And once atonement had been made in the proper way, God then was able to bless the land with rain. All right.
How do you spell ossuary?
Oh, Ossiary, maybe? That sounds about right.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so do you guys want to stop and do the Philistines next week? Or do you want me to just read through this quickly? And we can start. Okay. So when the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. So for whatever reason, age, whatever reason, David doesn't do well in this particular battle with the Philistines. And Ishbi-Benob was one of the sons of the giant. We're not given the name of the giant. We do know that it is part of Goliath's family. Most people believe it was his father, but we don't know that for sure. We do know that it was part of Goliath's family, this large, giant tribe of people. Anyone remember approximately how big we think Goliath was? We said 9'9" was what we went by. We could be off depending on the size of a cubit, but I mean these are 9, 10, 11 foot. Some people even say 12-foot people. These are very big people. So this one, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels. We're talking about 300 shekels is what did his spear weigh? What did his spear weigh? Shoot. Did I put it in the notes of my Bible? No, because that's one of those things I thought I would always remember. I can't remember. Anyway, was big, was bearing a new sword, thought that he could kill David. So he's even got a new sword out there, and he's going to kill David. But Abishai, here's our Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, the son of Zeruiah came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. And then the men of David swore to him, saying, "You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." All right, David, please stay home. You are our hope. It is because of you that our land is blessed. You are God's anointed. Please do not put yourself in danger anymore. So there's one battle, there's one giant. Now it happened afterwards that there was again or another battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbachai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, who was one of the sons of the giant. Saph being the one who was killed. So he's another one of the sons of the giant. Again, there was a war at Gob with the Philistines. So now we're talking now about the third war, right? Yep, the third war with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jeri-Orgim, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. So now we're talking about a third giant who has been killed by David's mighty men. And then again in verse 20 it says, "Yet again there was a war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he was also born to the giant." So it would appear that these are all of the same family. Biblical scholars believe that these are likely Goliath's brothers that were killed. And so that seems to be the standard way that most people think about it. And when he defiled Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shemiah, David's brother, killed him. So someone kills each one of these giants to preserve David's life as he goes after him. And these 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So I've included in your packet for you to look at the who were the Anakim, the giants. It's just our gotquestions.org source. I just printed it off so that you could look at it. You're welcome to see the scripture where they're mentioned, the giants, who they might have come from, where they believe they might be, and then it can branch off. If you're more interested, you can research it out even more, but it gives us some biblical background. Out of an interest, I did a little research on the 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand, and here I've included in your packet a picture of a current day person who has that. It is a DNA coding for certain people. And as I was beginning to do a little research on it, because I do these rabbit trails where I get lost, I found out that there is a family in Brazil where all 14 members of the family have that DNA coding.
Those with red hair.
They all, I don't see any redheads in here, but they're talking about the latest baby that was born, and see the 6 fingers on that holding the bottle. The baby has the 6 fingers, and they all have 6 fingers. And they all have 6 toes.
I bet you they're really studying that family.
So you can see the x-rays and how that is in there. I found it so fascinating. I mean, check it out, playing the piano with 6 fingers.
Wow.
This is all one group. But there are more than just this family. It's just phenomenal that this family has so many as added. And here's the 6 toes. And here's a guy just sitting around with his 6 fingers. So it must be very normal in their family.
So the giants all had 6.
We know that at least this one did. Whether or not all of them did or not, we're not given the information. So it's a supposition. Some people think probably so, but others think not. It's just but it's a guess because we're not given that information. It is interesting that it runs in families.
The interesting part to me is
you can turn that off, by the way.
Size of
No, go ahead.
the size of the